You know, when we look back, way back, through the dusty pages of history, certain names just, well, they loom larger than life, don't they? They feel less like people and more like forces of nature, like earthquakes or hurricanes. And perhaps the largest, the most blinding of them all is Alexander. Alexander the Great. We've all heard the name. We see the statues, the young heroic face, the eyes fixed on some distant, impossible horizon. And the story, it's the stuff of pure, unadulterated legend. A man who, before he was 33, had conquered the known world. A military mind so brilliant, so audacious that 2.5 millennia later, generals at West Point and Sandhurst still study his tactics, still shake their heads in wonder. He took a small, fractious kingdom in the north of Greece and stretched it into an empire that spanned 3 continents, from the shores of the Adriatic all the way to the mountains of India. It's staggering, the ambition, the drive, the sheer terrifying will of the man. But I find myself wondering, as you get a little older, you start to look at these things differently, don't you? You start to see the shadows behind the shining armor. You start to see the cracks in the marble, and you start to ask the hard questions. We call him great, but great for whom? History is asking the wrong question. We've been asking, was he a genius or a tyrant for 2,000 years? We've been trying to fit him into one of 2 boxes, as if he could only be one or the other, as if good and evil were simple labels. The truth, I think, is that he was both. The genius was the tyrant was the genius. The 2 were locked together, feeding each other, driving each other, until one finally consumed the other. So tonight, we're not going to just retell his life. That's been done. Instead, we're going to explore the 3 great battles that truly defined him, not the battles you read about in textbooks. The first was his battle against the world, the pinnacle of his genius. The second was his battle against himself, the birth of his tyranny. And the final tragic battle was his war against reality itself. This is the dark truth of the man we call great. To understand Alexander the genius, you have to understand one thing. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to win impossibly. He was an artist, and the battlefield was his canvas. He wasn't just a general, he was a grandmaster playing chess while his opponents were still learning the rules. He inherited the greatest army of the age from his father Philip, the Macedonian phalanx, a hedgehog of 18-foot spears, the sarissas. But it was what he did with it, how he combined it with his cavalry, the hammer and the anvil, that changed warfare forever. His early battles, Granicus, Issus, they were masterpieces of audacity. He was always outnumbered. He always led the charge himself. He had this uncanny, almost supernatural ability to see the one critical, fleeting moment of opportunity in the chaos of battle, the kairos, as the Greeks called it, the decisive moment, and he never ever hesitated. But all of this was just a prelude, the dress rehearsal for his magnum opus, the day he would not just defeat an empire, but break its very soul. October 1st, 331 BC, the plains of Gaugamela. This is it. This is the moment that defines Alexander the Great. Let's set the stage. Alexander has around 47,000 men. He is facing Darius III, King of Kings, who has gathered the entire might of the Persian Empire. Ancient sources, well, they exaggerate wildly. 1 million men, but modern estimates are still staggering. Darius had, at a minimum, 200,000 soldiers, maybe more. He had cavalry from every corner of his empire. He had the feared Scythian war chariots with sharp blades spinning from their wheels. And Darius, he wasn't a fool. He had learned from his last defeat at Issus. He had chosen this ground, a wide, flat, open plain, perfect for his overwhelming numbers and his chariots. He'd even had his men level the ground, smoothing it out so his chariots wouldn't be stopped. The night before the battle, his most trusted general, Parmenion, comes to him. Parmenion is old school. He's Philip's man. He's steady, and he is terrified. He looks out at the endless sea of Persian campfires, a whole galaxy of lights stretching to the horizon, and he begs Alexander, "We must attack at night. It's the only way, a surprise attack." And Alexander gives one of the most famous replies in history, "I will not steal my victory." Think about the arrogance, the supreme, unshakable self-confidence. He's not just going to win, he's going to beat the largest army ever assembled on the ground they chose in broad daylight so that the whole world can watch him do it. Dawn breaks. The 2 armies are a terrifying sight. 2 lines, miles long. The Persian line is so wide it outflanks the Macedonians on both sides. Darius has placed himself in the center, protected by his elite, the 10,000 apple-bearers, the immortals. The battle begins. Alexander does something strange. He doesn't charge the center. He doesn't attack the flanks. He begins to move his army sideways. He leads his elite companion cavalry, the hammer, far out to the right, riding parallel to the Persian line. It looks like he's running away. Darius, confused, has to order his own cavalry on the left flank to ride out and meet him, to stop him from, well, from whatever he's doing. The entire Persian line starts to stretch, trying to keep up. It's like pulling on a thread. This is the genius. Alexander isn't attacking. He's forcing Darius to react. He's making the most powerful man in the world dance to his tune. Darius, seeing Alexander moving further and further away, panics. He unleashes his ultimate weapon, the scythed chariots. He orders a full charge at the Macedonian center. This is supposed to be the decisive blow, the move that rips the phalanx to shreds. It's a disaster. Alexander had planned for it. He'd ordered his front lines to open up dedicated lanes. The spearmen, at the last second, just step aside. The chariots, with no horses to hit, charge harmlessly through the gaps into the Macedonian rear, where they're surrounded and cut down. The ultimate weapon, neutralized. But now, the real move, because Darius had sent his left cavalry to chase Alexander and his chariots to charge the center. A gap had opened in the Persian line, a small one, a fleeting one, just to the left of Darius's personal guard. This was it, the kairos, the moment he'd been waiting for, the moment he knew would come. Alexander wheels his companion cavalry. He forms them into a wedge, a spear tip, and with his personal battle cry, "Alalalai," he leads the charge himself, not at the army, but at that one tiny gap. It's one of the most terrifying charges in human history. A wedge of 2,000 heavily armored horsemen, riding at full gallop, aimed like a missile, not at the soft parts of the army, but straight at the throat of the king. Darius, a king on a war chariot surrounded by his immortals, sees this demon, this 25-year-old, with the eyes of a god, covered in dust and blood, riding straight for him. And Darius does the one thing a king of kings must never do. He panics, he turns his chariot, and he flees. The moment the army sees its king run, it's over. The chain of command shatters. The most powerful army in the world dissolves. It's no longer an army, it's just a panicked mob of 200,000 men, running for their lives. The battle became a slaughter. Alexander had won. He was, without question, the king of Asia. The Persian Empire was his. This was the apex of the genius. An impossible victory, won with such precision, such audacity, that it still echoes today. But as he stood on that field, surrounded by the wreckage of an empire, something else stood with him. The cost of this kind of ambition. Because when you achieve the impossible, when you defeat the entire world, what's left to fight? Well, it turns out the only opponent worthy of Alexander was Alexander himself, and that was a battle he could not win. There's an old, wise, and dangerous saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We love to believe we're immune. We love to think, if it were me, I'd be different. I'd be a good king. But what is power, really? It's not just giving orders. It's a poison, a slow, sweet poison. It starts to warp your reality. Everyone around you stops saying no. Every idea you have is brilliant. Every joke you tell is hilarious. Every action you take is justified. You stop being a person, and you start to believe you are the state. You start to believe you are infallible. Now imagine you're Alexander. You're not just a king. You are the man who just conquered the world. You've been declared the son of Zeus Ammon by the oracle at Siwa. You are, for all intents and purposes, a living god. And the people around you, the men who've been with you from the beginning, they start to look small. They're just men. They bleed. They complain. They don't understand your divine destiny. This is where the genius begins to eat itself. This is where the tyrant is born. He starts to adopt Persian customs. He wears Persian robes. He introduces proskynesis, the Persian court ritual of bowing and kissing the hand of the king. To the Persians, this was normal. It was just respect. To the Macedonians, the grizzled veterans who had fought and bled with him, this was blasphemy. You bow before a god. You don't bow before a man. You don't bow before your friend, your comrade in arms. And they see Alexander, their Alexander, demanding this, and they get uneasy. This is the setting. The year is 328 BC. The place is Marakanda, in modern-day Uzbekistan. The war isn't over. It's devolved into a brutal, grinding guerrilla war against an enemy who won't stay and fight. The army is tired. They are thousands of miles from home, and they are drinking. A lot. The Macedonians were prodigious drinkers. And these are not quiet, contemplative evenings. These are raucous, dangerous, ego-fueled affairs. And on this one night, at a banquet, the drinking gets heavy. The flattery starts. The yes men, the new Persian courtiers, start praising Alexander. They compare him to the gods. They say his achievements make the old heroes, even Heracles, look small. And Alexander, he just soaks it in. He loves it. but one man. One man isn't playing along. His name is Clitus, Black Clitus. He is not a yes man. He is the opposite of a yes man. He is old school Macedonia. He fought under Philip. At the Battle of Granicus, when Alexander's helmet was split open, and an enemy's sword was coming down for the killing blow, it was Clitus who rode in and hacked off the Persian's arm, saving Alexander's life. Clitus is his friend, his brother. He is the man who saved him, and he is very, very drunk, and he can't stand this blasphemy. He stands up. He starts to shout. He reminds Alexander that his divine achievements were won with the blood of Macedonians. He reminds him of his father Philip, whose achievements, Clitus says, were greater. "This is the hand that saved you, Alexander," he bellows, holding up his right arm. "And this is the reward we get, to be forced to bow before Persians." The room goes silent. This is not just an argument. This is treason. This is a soldier, a subject, humiliating his god-king in front of the entire court. Alexander is shaking. This isn't the king. This is something else. This is pure, distilled rage. This is the tyrant. He screams that Clitus is a coward. He calls his own Macedonians sheep. Clitus just breaks. He quotes a line from a Greek play, a line about how wars are won by the many, but the glory is taken by the one. That's it, Alexander snaps. He screams for his guards, but his friends, the sober ones, know what's happening. They hold him back. They drag Clitus out of the room, trying to save his life. But Clitus, drunk and furious, breaks free and comes back in, shouting, "Alexander, tell me what I must say to be free." Alexander sees a guard's spear leaning against the wall. He snatches it. Before anyone can move, he runs Clitus through. The silence in that room must have been total. The sound of his best friend, his brother, the man who saved his life, choking on his own blood at his feet. And in that second, the rage vanishes. The god-king dissolves. The tyrant evaporates. And all that's left is a 28-year-old man staring in horror at what he's done. The genius is gone. Herodotus tells us Alexander didn't just feel remorse. He collapsed. He pulled the spear from Clitus's body and tried to turn it on himself, to impale himself on the same weapon. His guards had to wrestle it away from him. They had to drag him to his tent. For 3 days, he didn't eat, he didn't drink, he didn't sleep. He just lay there, weeping, calling Clitus's name. His army, his world, was terrified, not that their king was a murderer, but that their king would die of grief. He had to be coaxed back to life by his philosophers, who, in a final terrible act of flattery, convinced him that it wasn't his fault, that as a king, he was above the law, that whatever he did was, by definition, justice. He accepted it. He had to. It was the only way he could keep living. It was the only way to justify what he had done. He had to stop being a man and become the god. But the murder of Clitus, it was a wound that never healed. It was the moment the shadow consumed the light. He was no longer just conquering the world. He was running from himself, and his paranoia, his tyranny, was just getting started. He would soon order the execution of Parmenion, the loyal old general who had begged him to attack at night at Gaugamela. He had him killed without a trial, simply because the general's son was implicated in a plot. The genius was still there, but it was now in service to the monster. He had won the war against the world. He had lost, spectacularly, the war against himself. And now, there was only one enemy left: reality. There's a Greek word, hubris. We translate it as pride or arrogance, but that's too simple. Hubris is the pride of mortals who start to believe they are gods. It's the dangerous, intoxicating belief that the rules of nature, the rules of human limitation, simply do not apply to you. And in the Greek tragedies, hubris is always followed by nemesis, retribution, the downfall. After the death of Clitus, after the conquest of Persia, Alexander was no longer a king. He was a force, a man possessed. He was no longer fighting for Greece. He was no longer fighting for glory. He was fighting because he didn't know how to stop. He was fighting to outrun the ghost of his father. He was fighting to outrun the ghost of Clitus. He was fighting to prove to the universe that he was, in fact, a god, and gods have no limits. He dragons his army, his tired, weary, homesick army, into India. He's not fighting for strategy anymore. He's chasing myths. He's heard legends of Heracles and Dionyso, gods who had marched to the east, and he, Alexander, must go further. He fights some of his most brutal battles there. He fights against King Porus and his war elephants at the Hydaspes. He wins, of course. He always wins. And then he wants to keep going. He wants to march to the great outer sea, what he believed was the edge of the world. He doesn't care that his men are ragged, that their boots are gone, that they are dying of sickness and snake bites in the monsoon rains. He must continue. And then something happens, something that had never happened before. They reach the Hyphasis River, and the army, his army, his unbreakable Macedonian phalanx stops. It's not a violent mutiny. It's not a rebellion. It's just an ending. The men just sit down. Their spokesman, a man named Coenus, comes before Alexander, and he, with unbelievable courage, he speaks the truth. He tells him, "King, look at us, look at our faces, look at our clothes. We are all that is left of the Macedonians. The others are dead in the dust of Asia or of sickness, or they are crippled. We have followed you. We would follow you anywhere, but we are just men. We miss our homes. We miss our wives, our children. We want to go home. Please, King, lead us home." Alexander is broken. This is a defeat more total than any battlefield loss. This is reality, in the form of his exhausted, loyal men finally saying, "No, you are not a god, you are a man, and we are men, and we are done." He locks himself in his tent for 3 days, the same as after Clitus. He's waiting, he's hoping that they will change their minds, that the yes men will win out, but the camp is silent. The army just waits. He finally emerges, and he gives the order. "We are going home." But the tyrant, the man ruled by hubris, has to have the last word. He can't just go home. He can't admit defeat. He couldn't defeat his men's will, so he will defeat nature itself. He splits his army. He sends half back by sea, and he takes the other half, tens of thousands of soldiers, women, children, followers, and he marches them home through the Gedrosian desert. This is perhaps the most terrible, pointless, cruel act of his entire life. The Gedrosian desert is one of the most inhospitable places on earth. It's a furnace. There is no food, there is no water. Why? Why do it? Because legend said that 2 other great heroes, Cyrus the Great and Queen Semiramis, had both tried to cross it, and both had failed, their armies annihilated. Alexander had to succeed. He had to prove that even where gods and legends failed, he would win. It was not a march. It was a 60-day death sentence. The sand was burning hot. Men's feet were baked. They were tormented by thirst. They found a small pool of water, and in their desperation, they trampled each other to death to get to it. They ate their pack animals. Then they ate the leather from their shields. Flash floods would come in the night and sweep away entire camps. By the time he stumbled out of that desert, 3/4 of his column, perhaps 40,000 people, were gone, vaporized, sacrificed to nothing, sacrificed to the ego of a man who could not bear to be told no by reality. He had won. He had crossed the desert. He had proven his point, and he had returned to his new capital, Babylon, as a hollowed-out shell, a king of ashes. He didn't last long after that. He arrived in Babylon. He started planning. Of course he did. He couldn't stop. He was planning to circumnavigate Africa. He was planning to conquer Arabia. He was 32 years old. And then, one night, after another heavy banquet, another night of hard drinking, he came down with a fever. Just a fever. The man who had survived 100 battles, who had an arrow wound in his lung, who had been run through with spears, was brought down by a common sickness, or perhaps poison. We'll never know. It took him 10 days to die. He lay there in his palace in Babylon, burning up. The great, invincible, divine Alexander was just dying. His army, the grizzled veterans who were left, they heard he was gone. They refused to believe it. They stormed the palace. They demanded to see him, and his generals let them, one by one, in single file. 10,000 men, his Macedonians, filed past his deathbed in total silence, just to look at him one last time. They say he couldn't speak, but he acknowledged every one of them with his eyes. The genius, the tyrant, the man, all of it, just slipping away. His generals gathered around him. They asked him the final, desperate question. "Alexander, to whom do you leave your empire? This world that he had built, this new reality he had forged in blood and fire. Who would rule it?" He supposedly whispered his last words. "Toi kratistoi, to the strongest. To the strongest." He didn't name an heir. He didn't have a plan. He didn't secure his legacy. He just lit the fuse and walked away. He left his entire world as a prize. The moment he was dead, his generals, his companions, ripped the empire apart. They tore at it like wolves. His mother was murdered. His wife was murdered. His infant son was murdered. Everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed, and everyone he had sacrificed, it all just disintegrated. So, we're back to our question. Genius or tyrant? He was a genius, a military mind that we may never see again. A man whose vision, for good or ill, blended East and West and created the world we still live in today. The Hellenistic age he ushered in. It gave us the language of the New Testament, the Library of Alexandria, the foundations of modern science. And he was a tyrant, a paranoid, narcissistic, obsessive monster. A man who, in his quest for a legacy, burned cities, hollowed out cultures, and left just chaos in his wake. He won his battle against the world. He lost his battle against himself, and his war against reality ended in a draw. He died, a man, but he left behind a legend, a god. The truth, the dark truth we have to live with, is that greatness and monstrosity, they aren't opposites. They are so often born from the very same seed. That terrifying, obsessive, brilliant, and destructive thing we call absolute ambition. And the legacy of Alexander is a question that haunts us 2,000 years later. What is the price of being great? And is it ever worth the cost? We've talked a lot. Now, I truly want to know what you think. After hearing this story, not the legend, but the man, what is your verdict? Do you believe a legacy like his was worth the profound cost? Let me know your thoughts, your reflections in the comments below. I read them and I value them.